For decades, Donny Osmond smiled through the spotlight, never letting the cracks show. He was the clean-cut teen idol, the family man, the consummate performer. But now, Donny has finally broken his silence, and it confirms what fans and critics alike have whispered for years. The truth, long buried under layers of industry polish and family loyalty, is more emotional and shocking than anyone imagined. Behind the velvet voice and perfect image was a story of personal struggle, quiet rebellion, and a decision that could have changed everything. And now, Donny's ready to set the record straight, on his own terms. A perfect image, a hidden truth. For more than 7 decades, Donny Osmond has worn the face of American innocence, the poster boy of wholesome fame, the teen idol who never slipped. With sparkling eyes and a clean-cut smile, he became the symbol of purity in a business built on spectacle. He sang about puppy love, hosted variety shows, and raised a family, all while projecting the image of someone who simply had it all together. But behind that perfectly pressed image, a quiet storm was building. From the outside, Donny's life looked charmed. Decades of chart-topping music, a successful marriage, a devout faith, and an untarnished record in an industry that eats its young. While others crumbled under pressure or headlines, he endured. Yet endurance came at a cost. And for much of his life, he carried something within himself he couldn't explain, let alone share. Now, the mask is coming off. This isn't a scandal. It's not a tabloid splash or a headline grab. It's something deeper, more personal. Donny has finally confirmed what many long suspected, not about his public life, but about the weight of keeping parts of himself hidden for so long. "I created a version of myself that the world needed," he says. "But there were parts I kept in the shadows, parts that hurt." What began as survival, a polished image, a careful script, slowly became a prison. For years, he smiled for the cameras while privately wrestling with an inner truth he didn't feel safe to reveal. He feared not only rejection from fans, but a collapse of the very identity he'd built from childhood. Now, looking back with the clarity that comes only with age, Donny has chosen to open up, not to shock, but to set himself free. He's calling this chapter not a confession, but a realignment, a reckoning, and most of all, a release. He says, "I'm no longer living for approval. I'm living for truth." This is no longer the story of a teen idol. It's the story of a man who lived for decades under the weight of expectations until he couldn't anymore. Early stardom and pressure to please, Donny Osmond didn't find fame. Fame found him. At just 5 years old, he was performing with his brothers on national television. By 13, he was a solo sensation. Girls screamed his name, parents trusted his smile, and the industry wrapped him in gold and in rules. From the beginning, there was pressure to be perfect. That pressure never let up. Every note had to be pure, every answer polite, every smile authentic, even when it wasn't. Inside, Donny was still a boy learning who he was, but outside, he was already being worshipped as a finished product. There was no room for mistakes, no space for doubt, and absolutely no tolerance for deviation. The Osmond brand was built on values. That meant clean lyrics, clean living, and clean images. What didn't fit the mold wasn't welcome. As he grew older, Donny had to constantly reinvent himself, not to reflect who he really was, but to meet what others wanted from him. The 70s heartthrob gave way to the 80s comeback kid. Then the 90s Vegas headliner. Always smiling, always safe, always Donny. But the boy inside that machine, he felt the cracks. He admits now that he often wondered what might have happened if he had ever been allowed to just stop, to question, to stumble, to not perform. I loved performing, he says, but I didn't always love who I had to be to do it. This wasn't a rebellion waiting to explode. It was a quiet ache, a lifelong sense that there was more inside him than he could express. That feeling of being different, though unnamed, followed him from dressing rooms to stages to hotel rooms after shows. He became a master of delivering what was expected, even as it pulled him further from what he truly needed. That disconnect grew over time, not into rebellion, but into exhaustion. He learned to keep the personal locked tightly away, even from those closest to him. And the longer he played the part, the more the real Donny faded into the background. Now, decades later, he looks back with compassion, not shame. That little boy wanted to please everyone, he says. I just never realized. It would take so much from me. A marriage that shocked fans. When Donny Osmond married Debbie Glenn at just 20 years old, it was supposed to be a personal victory, a quiet act of love. But for many fans, it felt like betrayal. He was the dream boy, the safe crush, the fantasy, and suddenly, he was married, taken. Fans wrote angry letters. Some booed him on stage. I thought they'd be happy for me, Donny recalls, but to them, I'd broken the illusion. What was supposed to be a new chapter in his life turned into a media minefield. The perfect image had a crack, and people didn't like it. But Donny and Debbie pushed forward. Together they raised 5 children, balancing music, faith, and family in a spotlight that never dimmed. Privately, they were in love. Publicly, they were questioned. Over the years, rumors swirled. Some accused him of forcing the relationship to maintain his image. Others claimed he wasn't being honest with himself or the world. But Donny never fired back. He kept his silence. He focused on his family, on surviving the noise. Now, he reflects on those early days with a mix of pride and pain. We didn't regret getting married, he says, but we felt the backlash. It hurt. Through all of it, Debbie stood firm, quiet, graceful, and supportive. She knew the man behind the icon, the one with doubts, fears, and questions, the one who didn't always have the answers. What many didn't see was that Donny's marriage wasn't about image, it was about sanity. In Debbie, he found not just a partner, but a place to be real. She became his anchor, his mirror, the one person he didn't have to perform for. Still, their relationship had its storms. The years brought pressure, secrets, distance, but they chose to face it together. Now, Donny calls her the reason I'm still standing. And after more than half a century together, they've become more than a couple. They are a testament to what quiet love can survive. Scandals that never smoked out the truth. For decades, Donny Osmond's name would occasionally trend, not for music, but for rumors. Whispers of affairs, late-night partying, even secret breakdowns. But none of it ever stuck. His PR team kept things polished. The headlines were always redirected. And the public image? Untouched. Behind closed doors, however, some of the rumors weren't entirely false. Donny now admits there were nights of confusion, moments where he drifted from the image people clung to. But the real scandal wasn't women or wild behavior, it was silence. The scandal was who he couldn't be. He reveals now that much of his life was spent deflecting, hiding, surviving. Not out of deception, but fear. Fear of losing fans, fear of disappointing his family, fear of becoming a cautionary tale instead of an icon. I wasn't lying to the world, he says. I just didn't know how to tell the whole truth. Not yet. He kept it all in, year after year, tour after tour. And as the scandals faded from the press, they grew louder in his own mind. The longer he avoided them, the heavier they became. Some nights, he says, he'd stare into the mirror backstage and feel like he was looking at a stranger. And yet, the world kept cheering. Now, he stopped running. He stopped denying. Not every rumor was true, but something deeper was always hiding underneath. A truth about who he was, what he felt, and the cost of constantly performing. The world never caught me, he says, but the truth did. Confession time. What he kept hidden. At 81, Donny Osmond finally let go of the one thing he'd held on to the longest. The part of himself he never dared speak about. It wasn't about scandals. It wasn't about regret. This wasn't a confession born from pressure or exposure. It came from exhaustion. A quiet decision, made after decades of silence. The truth he revealed wasn't loud or salacious. It was tender, deeply personal. For most of his life, Donny struggled with something he couldn't name publicly, a conflict between identity and expectation. He lived his days as the ideal, the perfect son, the faithful husband, the tireless entertainer. But inside, he felt a disconnect, a quiet, aching sense that who he was on the inside didn't fully align with the image the world adored. "I felt different," he finally said. "Not wrong, not broken, just different." He kept that feeling locked away, buried under layers of applause, management meetings, and tightly scripted interviews. Every time the world asked for more of Donny Osmond, he gave it. But each smile came with a cost. He admits now that there were times he wanted to disappear, not out of shame, but for peace. "I didn't want to run away," he said. "I just wanted to be real, even for a minute." When he finally spoke his truth, it wasn't to the media, it was to his family. His wife, his children, and to his surprise, their love never wavered. They didn't see a failure. They saw a man who had lived in conflict for too long. And finally, he gave himself permission to be whole. "The image saved my career," he said, "but telling the truth saved my soul." The impact on family life. Donny Osmond has long been praised for being a family man, a devoted husband, a father of 5. But now, with the benefit of time and truth, he admits that his internal struggle affected every corner of his home. His wife Debbie, always graceful, always steady, stood by him even as she sensed something beneath the surface. There were years where she could tell he was present, but not fully there. He'd laugh, he'd perform, he'd sit at the dinner table, but part of him felt unreachable. "I knew something was weighing on him," she later said. "I just didn't know what it was, but I loved him through it anyway." His children, too, noticed his moments of distance. The pressure of upholding a legacy while managing an invisible burden left him drained. He would often retreat into his music or his work, finding safety in performance rather than conversation. The man who gave the world so much joy sometimes struggled to give that same light at home. Now, Donny acknowledges the emotional cost. "I wasn't always the father or husband I wanted to be," he says, "but I was trying to protect them from a truth I hadn't accepted myself." It was Debbie who eventually became the mirror he couldn't avoid. She listened. She stood with him. And when he finally told her the truth, she didn't flinch. She held him. "You saved me when I couldn't save myself," he told her at 81, voice trembling. That one sentence summed up decades of quiet devotion. Their bond wasn't broken by truth, it was strengthened. The family didn't fall apart. Instead, they rallied, they grew, And today, Donny says their unity is his greatest achievement, far beyond gold records or standing ovations. Crisis moments in career. There's a reason Donny Osmond always looked so polished. He had to be. The show had to go on, even when his heart couldn't. But what fans never saw were the moments backstage. The breakdowns just before the spotlight. The shaky breaths. The voice rehearsals done more to silence anxiety than tune performance. In recent years, he's admitted to having several emotional collapses while on tour. Quiet moments of panic, self-doubt, and internal chaos, all carefully hidden behind a dazzling smile. "There were times I was cracking," he said, "but I'd put on the suit, walk out, and pretend everything was okay." There were points when he nearly walked away completely. One night in particular, during a Las Vegas residency, he sat alone in his dressing room after a standing ovation and cried. Not from joy, but from sheer exhaustion. "I couldn't tell where Donny ended and the image began," he said. He pushed himself to maintain the energy the audience expected. The optimism, the gratitude, the brand. And in doing so, he lost sight of his own limits. The weight of being Donny Osmond, idol, husband, Mormon, performer, pressed on him like a second skin he couldn't remove. Only now, decades later, is he willing to admit that the pressure nearly cost him more than his voice. It nearly cost him his sense of self. But instead of quitting, he chose to stop hiding. The cracks were no longer flaws. They were openings. "I wasn't always okay," he said, "and that's okay. I'm not ashamed of it anymore." Fans' reactions to the truth. When Donny finally spoke openly about his struggles, the world listened, and the response was overwhelming. Some fans were stunned. A few felt betrayed. But the vast majority? They responded with compassion, with understanding, with love. Social media flooded with support. Messages poured in from longtime fans and total strangers alike. "We love you more for your honesty," one fan wrote. "You helped me through my childhood. Now let us be here for you." Donny had feared rejection. He feared undoing decades of trust. But instead, he found something deeper than adoration: connection. His vulnerability didn't push people away. It pulled them closer. For many, his honesty was a healing moment. He had always represented perfection, but now he represented something even more powerful: authenticity. He wasn't just a performer anymore. He was human. And fans saw themselves in his story: the pressure to conform, the silence around identity, the courage to finally speak. "This doesn't erase what you were to us," one fan commented. "It just makes it real." Even former critics gave him credit. The man who once symbolized squeaky clean idealism had, at last, shown the world the cracks in the armor, and in doing so, became more beloved than ever. Donny's. Truth didn't tarnish the legend. It deepened it. Finding freedom at 81. After a lifetime of performing, smiling, and staying on script, Donny Osmond is finally experiencing something new: freedom. Not just from expectations, but from the weight of silence. At 81, he says he feels more at peace than ever. Not because the world changed, but because he did. "I'm free," he said quietly, "and I've never meant those words more." He no longer filters himself through the lens of public image. There's no role to protect, no mask to keep on. He's living unguarded, for the first time in decades. He walks through the world not as a product, not as a polished brand, but as Donny, the man, the husband, the father, the artist. He says the relief came not in one moment, but in layers. First, telling Debbie, then the kids, then the fans. With every step, the burden lifted a little more. I didn't realize how heavy it all was, he confessed, until I laid it down. There's no rebranding campaign, no reinvention strategy, just honesty. And it's that raw truth that's allowed Donny to finally live, not just for others, but for himself. Now, he spends his days doing what brings joy, mentoring young artists, writing, reflecting, being present with family. And when he sings now, it's not to prove anything. It's because he wants to. Freedom arrived late, but better than never. What the future looks like. At 81, Donny Osmond isn't chasing a comeback. He's curating a legacy. For the first time, it's not about topping charts or pleasing crowds. It's about telling the full story, the one behind the spotlight, behind the suits, behind the perfect smile. His future is no longer performance-centered. It's personal. He's currently writing a memoir, one he promises will be the most honest thing I've ever done. It won't just recount tour dates and milestones. It will dive into the parts of his life he spent decades hiding. Identity, doubt, pressure, love, secrets, and healing. He's also collaborating on a documentary project, exploring not just his own life, but the cultural machine that shaped him and nearly erased him. Interviews, archived footage, never-before-seen journals. It's not just a story about Donny Osmond. It's about what happens when a person becomes a persona too young and stays trapped in it too long. There's even talk of a stage musical, not the glittery Donny of TV specials, but the real one. The boy behind the curtains, the man who broke under weight, and the elder who pieced himself back together. Younger entertainers now look to Donny not as a legend of Polish, but as a model of truth and transformation. He's mentoring young artists on how to protect their sanity, honor their identity, and say no when the machine asks for too much. His future isn't shaped by image anymore. It's shaped by intention. He's choosing honesty over performance, truth over myth. And for the first time, he's not just being remembered, he's being understood. Lessons for us all. Donny Osmond's story is no longer just a celebrity narrative. It's a mirror. For anyone who's ever felt the pressure to be perfect. For anyone who's smiled through discomfort. For anyone who's hidden their truth for the sake of fitting in. His life teaches us that perfection is a prison, not a prize. That the pursuit of approval, whether from fans, family, or faith, can drown out your own voice. But he also shows us that it's never too late to reclaim it. Vulnerability isn't weakness, he said recently. It's how we finally connect. Donny reminds us that image may impress, but authenticity inspires. The masks we wear may protect us for a while, but in time, they also rob us of the life we were meant to live. His journey from idol to individual is a blueprint for courage, for standing in your truth, even when it comes decades late. His message is clear. No one is flawless. Not even the boy next door with $1 million smile and a Billboard hit. And that's okay, because real connection comes not from pretending, but from revealing. Through his openness, he's giving others the courage to speak their truth, to shed their performance, to finally breathe. Authenticity outlasts applause. A final reflection on love and identity. In the end, Donny Osmond's story isn't about fame. It's about becoming whole. It's about a boy raised in a spotlight who spent most of his life trying to live up to something that never really fit. A man torn between duty and desire, applause and authenticity. And yet, through it all, one constant remained: love. Marriage and children grounded me, he says. In a world of stages and scripts, it was his family that held the truth. Debbie, in particular, became his mirror. his sanctuary, the one person who saw beyond the icon. When he finally spoke the truth he'd buried for decades, she didn't run. She embraced him. "Your truth didn't break us," she told him. "It saved us." Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it's that realness, hard-won and fiercely protected, that now defines his legacy. Donny Osmond is no longer a symbol of perfection. He is something far more enduring, a man who faced himself and chose truth. At 81, he stands not as a flawless idol, but as a fully human, fully honest elder. One who has known the pressure of hiding and the peace of finally letting go. What we suspected all along wasn't scandal. It wasn't shame. It was something simpler, something truer. A man, not a myth. Human, real, and finally, whole.